Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unity Media's weekly show, The H Panel. The H Panel starts now. Today, we'll be taking on making sense of USS tech on Abiy Ahmed. That's the topic of the day. And I have, as usual, Faisal Robla, Yusuf Gabhewat, and Rizkel Gabisa, the panelists is full house today. And as usual, we'll start what stood out for each panelist over the past 7 days. And the topic is making sense of USS take on Abiy Ahmed. And we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Those who are viewing us today, we thank you very much, and we would appreciate if you can share to others so that they can also access our material. Welcome again, and today we'll start with Professor Gabisa. What stood out for you over the past 7 days?
I guess this is once again, an event-filled week for the Horn of Africa. While there are many things that I could say stood out for me, it is the tale of two cities that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia and the Commander-in-Chief of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the performance that he made before his general staff is what really stood out for me. First, as humorous, second, as emblematic of the kind of situation that the country is in and the kind of leader that this country has. What I mean by the tale of two cities is this: you'd think that is supposed to be guidance on military matters, on military reform, military readiness, or military preparedness, because this is the general staff that he is addressing. But he talked about Ethiopia's history, world history, since World War II. In about half an hour, he moved from World War II, selectively citing whatever he wanted to make a point about his own regime. But at the end of the day, the picture that you get is that Ethiopia, from his perspective, is a country that is stable. The country is at peace with itself and with its neighbors. Its economy is growing, productivity rising, and ready to take off. And that takeoff is going to culminate in the year 250 in making Ethiopia one of 20 prosperous and most developed countries in the world. Never mind that about 2 years ago that he said that Ethiopia would be one of the two countries that is going to be economically dominant. The reality of Ethiopia that we know is that it's a country where people cannot make ends meet. Inflation is ravaging the country, especially the urban areas, including Addis Ababa, where people live on salaries. Their income is not rising, but inflation is going through the roof. Productivity or production itself is not making supplies to the cities possible. It is a country that is basically diplomatically isolated in the world, that had earned the condemnation of the world, and the progressive and normal countries of the world that are accountable to their citizens have isolated Ethiopia, and Ethiopia finds itself befriending the dictators of the world that are becoming increasingly becoming international pariah, like Putin or Xi Jinping, Eritrea. These are the friends that Abiy Ahmed counts as Ethiopia's friends. But this is the reality of the country, that it is an isolated country today, basically under siege from economic, political, military, and legitimacy crisis. It's a country that has the highest unemployment in sub-Saharan Africa, the highest unemployment probably in the world of youth unemployment. That's the reality of Ethiopia. Um, Economically, nothing is working. It's not growing. It is a country where major projects have come to a standstill. Major infrastructure projects like the railway from Djibouti to Mekelle to Waldea have stopped. But in the eyes of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Ethiopia is on its way, on its unstoppable, inexorable trajectory to become one of the great nations of the world, economically dominant, militarily strong, respected countries um, in the world by the year 2050. A strong economy by 2030, an enviable economy by 2030, and one of the great countries in the world by 2030. That I just couldn't resist the tale of two cities that he or two countries that he painted. There is one Ethiopia that exists in the mind of Abiy Ahmed, and there is an Ethiopia where actually normal people live and try to make ends meet. That I just couldn't resist, and it just stood out for me. Basically, that's it for me.
Thanks, Scale. It's interesting that he also painted a picture that the comparison he made Ethiopia today and Ethiopia during the PRDF era. He said the difference is we have Facebook now. Otherwise, peace, everything was the same before, and it was a very interesting comparing and contrasting. Faisal, what stood out for you? Your voice, you are muted now, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
yeah. Just a quick kind of take on Somalia before I come to what stood for me. Somalia finally succeeded to seat a parliament after so many wranglings, and very soon, hopefully, they will elect a president. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that despite that Somalia is a failed state, at least the different political forces in the country are more or less on a balance with each other, in the sense that one group or one side cannot dominate. So whether you call that positive or negative, it depends. However, there is no person who can dictate or dominate the political system in Somalia. So at least I don't know if that's a precursor to more of a participatory system where the powers are at an equilibrium or not. We don't know, but at least the good thing is no one has absolute power, unlike in the case of Ethiopia. What stood for me is actually the same as what stood for my colleague, in the sense that once I heard some of the information and social media and the report coming from Abiy's speech to the generals and high-ranking military as well as some civilians, it took me by a surprise. As we know, and as many people are saying, the version that we are seeing now is the edited version. So basically, 4 or 5 days a week, they've been editing, and what we saw is what Abiy really felt comfortable with. And I said to myself, if he really felt comfortable with what we have seen, Ethiopia is in a bad situation. Number one, uh, I think, as Eskel touched it, it's always a slippery slope when a leader or a president or a prime minister like Abiy tries to be a historian and a theoretician and tries to make up what he had lost in schooling and tries to now become a lecturer to people. Because in academia, when you make an error or when you make a proposal or hypothesize something, it's seen as a good thing because you can always reason and pontificate and another person can oppose you. When you are a leader and you say something that may or may not be right, that thing will stick with you. For Abiy to really analyze the world history in the last 100 years and then come to Ethiopia and also try to analogize or make an analogy with the Ethiopian situation and come to the conclusion that from here on, changes in Ethiopia mean disintegration and destruction of the country. I think he sent a very devastating message to everybody involved. The young person who is listening to Abiy, who hears him saying that any movement or any social uh, groups raising issues with the government is destroying the country, is a troubling message to hear from the top dog in the country. I think he also probably spoke in several ways to indicate and signal to the army that this is their time to probably take over the country, or at least have some level of managing this country. And I think whether that's again a precursor to a sort of soliciting the interests of the army to play a more bureaucratic role is again something that's also worrisome. In the old days of Ziad Barre in Somalia, what people saw was one is he really wanted to consolidate power. He gave the role of bureaucracy not to the educated, to the army. So you will hear or see an army colonel who is running the spaghetti factory or the sugar factory or the cement factory. And at one point, the entire infrastructure of the economy was run by colonels and sergeants and what have you. Whether Abiy is gearing towards that, we don't know. But his message to the army to say you are the protectors of everything is troublesome. The last one is the one that Skal touched, which is Abiy's infatuation with Ethiopia's growth. And about 2 years ago, I recall another video. He said that Ethiopia would be the second largest economy in the world. That's what he said. That means if Ethiopia surpasses, if it becomes number one to China in the 2050 or US, the two largest economies, one of them should vacate their positions for Ethiopia. Today, there was a little bit of a change to that thesis, and he said Ethiopia would be one of the 20 largest economies by year 2050, a mere few years away from. How did he arrive that? Here is a country that has a mere 90 billion GDP, peanuts, and in the midst of
Is it only for me or Faisal is disconnected?
yes. So I think I don't know where he's getting this analysis or who's feeding this analysis, but it's really an embarrassment for Abiy to say that he will be running or his country will be the second largest economy by 2050 and then revise that and say the top 20 in the world, where we have millions of people starving as we speak today. The Ethiopian government finally admitting that they can no longer rebuild some of the electric grids in some parts of the Wallo and other areas that the war has ravaged. So, beside embarrassment to the prime minister and to the country, here is really my take. Doing it for the last 20 years is what you call public policy forecast. Theoretical capacity forecast is often not what you see after 10, 15, 20 years. You can be closer to that when you have the right.
I think Faisal, you are having a connection challenge. So maybe until Faisal comes back, Yosef, what is your take on the last 7 days?
Okay, what stood out for me is probably the drama that is continuing around the humanitarian truce that has been announced, I believe, almost a month ago. And we have been talking about that here in UMD. And if I'm not wrong, I was the one who was pessimist at that time, and I still remain pessimist now. Here is why. Abiy, with that single hollow gesture of humanitarian truce that he declared, he has gained in such a short time. He has gained so many dividends out of it. Number one, Abiy's image has been boosted from the genociders that we know, or at least from a war criminal to a man of peace, however temporary that may be. If you remember, the moment he did that, the usual suspects, by the usual suspects, I mean the US, the UK, and the UN, they quickly rallied around him, and they made a huge fanfare out of it with exaggerated enthusiasm. Part of this show was on how to save Abiy that they have been conducting for a long time now. But the first dividend that he got out of that humanitarian truce gesture was the boost in his image. The second one is the one that we have been looking the last 2 days. What happened the last 2 days on the Afar front? Remember, when he after his humanitarian truce, only 20 trucks made it to Mekelle. After that, the blockade continued, and the reason that he provided was, it's not me, After all, the image that the image was that of a man of peace who was trying very hard to aid Tigray. So who is to blame? TDF was to blame for occupying certain Afar areas. The TDF was cornered. Again, TDF was cornered, and eventually it was forced to leave the Afar areas, and now it's back, almost in the Abala areas. Soon, of course, without firing a single shot, the Ethiopian army had regained all the strategic areas that the TDF has gained before. Now they will be situated almost 50 kilometers away from Mekelle. I mean, if they will be conducting an offensive soon as some claim, then they will have that big advantage. Now again, today I have heard that the demand has been expanded to include all the so-called Amhara areas, including Alamata and the Adarkai. That is the new demand of the government for them to continue the humanitarian aid to Tigray. So that was the second dividend that Abiy got out of this. The third one, if you remember, probably I was not here, but I'm sure at least Professor Hiskiel has dealt with it. It's about the Oromo, about an all-out assault that the Abiy government is conducting against the OLA in southern and western Tigray, western Ethiopia. Now, that wouldn't have been made possible had it not been for the humanitarian truce, one, but also in general for the peace process that has been going on, which has paralyzed the TDF into inaction. So the paralysis of the TDF was one of the reasons why now Abiy is concentrating on OLA. which means he has effectively used the humanitarian truce to divide and conquer. So that is the third dividend that Abiy got out of the humanitarian truce. The fourth one, of course, is remember that the US has been desperately looking for an excuse big enough to help him. Although it had imposed its own sanctions on Abiy, it has been looking for ways and means of helping Abiy economically. And now with that humanitarian truce was not only a cover for Abiy, but also a cover to USA to provide him with some kind of economic help. And that's exactly what happened when the World Bank provided $300 million loan. I don't think that would have happened without green light from the United States, even though, to its credit, the European Commissioner did complain about this. So we could see all these dividends, cascading from that single move that Abiy made when he declared the humanitarian truce unilaterally about a month ago. That was what stood out for me this week. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Before we jump into the topic of the day, Faisal, you want to finish because you were disconnected a couple of times.
I think I covered most of it. Probably the last issue I wanted was Abiy's infatuation with forecasting where Ethiopia would be in the future. About a year or two so ago, he said Ethiopia would be the second largest economy, surpassing either China or the United States. And at that time, everybody thought, the guy must be joking simply because Ethiopia's GDP at the time was a mere 90 billion, 420 million people. So it's a drop in the bucket in any economy in the world, no matter how you slice it. Now he came back and revised his numbers and said that Ethiopia would be one of the 20 largest economies. Again, you're talking about surpassing some European, Asian, the Asian tigers and USA, belonging to that group. And what he used, what type of data, who is doing the statistical analysis for him, we don't know. He is saying this on the backdrop of a country that has been devastated by war, that cannot even finance to replace the gridlock for the electric system that was destroyed between Tigray and Amara regions, not to mention that the entire country is now hosting close to 10 plus million people who are suffering from starvation. I just wanted to conclude by saying that I've been working with forecasts for the last 20 years, and I know how you do public policy forecasts. The theoretical projections that you do often are just a wishful kind of thinking, but advised by numbers and by history and by precedents that you have done or seen in the past. Here is a country where World Bank and IMF couldn't even put Ethiopia in the projection category for the coming few years in terms of its economy because of the devastation that came to the country. And here is the Prime Minister who is so sure that he will be one of the top 20 countries. And I saw this trend of just saying and throwing in numbers, not only by him, but also by his lieutenants. If you remember, within a week, Mustafa Umar of the Somali region first said that his region lost 11 million livestock. In a week's time, he came in front of the bureaucrats of the region and he said that the economy of the region grew by 6%. Here is a region that's saying they lost 11 million of their livestock, which is the mainstay of the economy of that region. So I don't know. I think professionalism has been buried in Ethiopia under Abiy, and words don't matter as far as they are concerned, so they can say whatever they want. Thank you for letting me finish my thoughts.
Thank you, Faisal. Let me just interject here. What stood out for me was what Dr. Tedros Adhanom of WHO said this week. And I think that speech should and would echo in the ears and minds of the West, the decision makers of the West. And let me play that one, and we'll talk. We'll go to the topic of the day.
I don't know if the world really gives equal attention to black and white lives. The whole attention to Ukraine is very important, of course, because it impacts the whole world. But even a fraction of it is not being given to Tigray, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, and the rest. A fraction. And I need to be blunt and honest that the world is not treating the human race the same way. Some are more equal than others. And when I say this, it pains me because I see it. Very difficult to accept, but it's happening. I hope the world comes back to its senses and treats all human life equally.
Okay, so today's topic is making sense of U.S. attack on Abiy Ahmed. This topic was triggered by FP's report 2 days ago. The resignation, the U.S. envoy for East Africa, that is Tatterfield, calling it quit. So, what is, or how should we read how the U.S. is reading Abiy Ahmed? We can focus on what happened in the recent weeks, or we can go longer than that. Professor Scale.
I think what I can say about the current U.S. envoy leaving his position only 3 months after he started working on the issue of the Horn of Africa, to me indicates, and I can only speculate, I can only surmise about this. I don't have an insider knowledge, but from what is being reported, from reading from what is being reported, David Satterfield was making progress in the Horn of Africa, particularly between Tigray and Ethiopia. Whether he was a lucky man who arrived to work on Horn of Africa issues, the conflict in Ethiopia, specifically between Tigray and the federal government and Amhara and all that, the entire conflagration in the area. Whether his success is because of the convergence of events or because of his diplomatic finesse, I cannot tell, but he was making progress. The humanitarian truce, which Abiy hurried to issue unilaterally as a humanitarian truce, was actually part of an agreement, a U.S. brokered agreement to achieve that humanitarian truce, leading to a permanent ceasefire and probably creating a buffer zone between Eritrea and Tigray. That kind of negotiation was going on. To some extent, this man was making progress in the region, contrary to his predecessor's work. But now, 3 months after, and making progress in the affair that he was assigned to, he is leaving. He's leaving not because the situation in the Horn of Africa, as was reported, was becoming intractable for him. As I said, he was making progress, some progress, limited progress, but he was making progress. At least 27 trucks got into Tigray first, 47 today. So he was making progress. Reportedly, he even traveled to Samara to make sure that he was able to see the trucks go through to Tigray. I think the reason that he is leaving is probably a bureaucratic entanglement within the State Department between the special envoy of the president and the Africa desk and the head of the Africa desk. It's probably this diplomatic competition that was holding him back, and he couldn't simply stomach it while he was making progress. So my reading of the situation is that it is the entanglement and the competition within the State Department between the State Department officials and the special envoy that could not come together and deliver together for the administration. But in other respects, he was really making progress in achieving some kind of ceasefire and making the humanitarian truce work to some extent. So my reading is that he's leaving because of bureaucratic entanglements uh, within the administration. That probably says something about how much attention is being paid to the Tigray issue, even within the administration itself. Something that you just played, Dr. Tedros um, uh, speaking to. I think Dr. Tedros, having been re-elected to his position, now feels that he is unfettered, or probably that he has the moral duty as the Director General of the WHO to speak to the heart of the matter, which he kind of spoke in Orwellian terms, saying that some are more equal, than the other. But he was really calling attention without taking it away from Ukraine, but also pay attention to other human suffering in the rest of the world, resonates in the world. And I think it also refers to the, the problem within the State Department, which led to the departure of David Satterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal.
Yes, I think I just like to, in passing, to also recognize the weight of Tedros's words. I think the world behaves, particularly the West behaves in a very racist way. I've been reading several literature in the last few years about racism in the West, and basically, of course, race plays a significant role, and it has played a significant role in the way the West has addressed the Ukrainian issue versus other conflicts. And to those ultra-nationalist Ethiopians who have been decrying about Tedros' statement, saying that he spoke for Tigray, no, he spoke for people of color, if they can understand that, for people of color, including Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia with the Tigray situation. So for them to parcel that out and accuse Tedros at this, point, and I'm not talking about his past history, whatever, but in this one, he spoke for people of color, that includes Arabs and Africans and what have you. And I will pass that. In terms of U.S. Take on the current Ethiopian situation, I think Scale touched it very well, and some parts of the situation. I checked Ethiopia, U.S. pillars towards Ethiopia in terms of its foreign policy. So if I just quickly go those four quick ones. One is protection of American citizens. Number two is to strengthen democratic institutions. And three is help broad-based economic growth and promote development. And fourth is advance regional peace and security. I think the two most pertinent one is democratization and regional security for the Horn. And so far, the U.S. gets, in my opinion, C- or D. See, the Ethiopian conflict comes on the heels of a long period of time that the U.S. has been failing in engaging Africa. I think the first one that the American policy towards Africa showed cracks was during the Rwandan massacre, which America sat tight but just watched without doing anything. Then it was the Somalia situation. And I think what Scale was mentioning in terms of the conflict within the bureaucracy and envoy, I will come back to that. But in the case of Somalia, the conflict was within the US, between the military wing and the diplomatic side. And that conflict literally cost Les Aspen's life, who had heart attack while he was still working on Somalia. From there on, America's policy towards the Horn, at best, has been weak. And I think when the Tigray conflict took place, of course, because of people who have had relationship with Susan Rice, who knew very well about Ethiopia and the real conflict of Ethiopia, really made good noise to address the issue. And the State Department Secretary Blinken comes from that rank. He worked for Susan Rice. He knew the situation very well. And when the first envoy, Jeff Feltman, was handpicked, America was remaining true to its tradition, which is whenever there is a high-stake issue, you go over the bureaucracy and pick a very seasoned politician and diplomat to show both the host country as well as people who are stakeholders in the conflict that the US is giving a high priority to the issue. That was the whole concept of picking up the first envoy, Feltman. Feltman didn't have really a good history for the Horn and in particular in general Africa. So he was a very slow, but had a very good heart towards the conflict. He really tried to bring good reports as to where Ethiopia is. He talked about the war, that the Ethiopian army was literally disintegrated. And I think that created some schism between him and the Ethiopian government, and he resigned. Now, the second one is about to resign. And I think the reason why he's resigning is not because he couldn't. I think he did some good work in terms of at least starting baby steps. And we talked about this last time. This process is going to be a very slow but steady process if the diplomacy through the envoy succeeds. I think, and probably we have to demand through the freedom of information to see what had happened. But also I join here rank with the Skial that there is an infight between the team of the envoy and the State Department Bureaucracy, particularly the Africa Bureau. I think envoys usually take the luster out of the bureaucracy as well as the embassy. So there could be some schism between the envoy side and the U.S. embassy in Addis, as well as the Africa Bureau State Department section, which feel that they have been ignored. There is a competition as to the attention of the secretary as well as the president when reports are to be given, and that creates schism. I think that's why probably he's resigning. He couldn't take it, and the new person is probably going to have some issues that Starfield had. So very sorry to see him gone, but within a short period of time, he turned heavy stones upside down. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Yusuf, what's your take on this?
I think there is a logical problem and an irreconcilable one for that within the policy of the United States in regard to the crisis that's going on in Ethiopia right now, especially in the crisis in regard to Tigray. Here is what I mean. The American policy is primarily aims at saving Abiy, no matter what. It doesn't see any other alternative to him at this point in time. So that is taken as given. We are looking at it logically now. The second one is the unity of Ethiopia as sacrosanct, which means that it doesn't want Tigray to secede. The US doesn't want to hear any talk in regard to secession of Tigray. Now, the point is logically, you cannot make these two cohabit together. Either you have to let go of Abiy or you have to let go of Tigray. If you let go of Abiy, for example, you will have a better, let's say you have a better government in Ethiopia, which accommodates Tigray, probably an autonomous Tigray within Ethiopia or a federal Ethiopia, then you could possibly see that one as one possibility. Or else you have to keep Abiy and let go of Tigray. There is no way in between. What America is trying to do is trying to find a compromise, an impossible compromise between a genocider and its victims, while the genocide, I mean, and there is no, which means that as the genocide is going on, or an unrepentant genocider has to cohabit the same space with its victims that would keep constantly fending off for themselves. There is no formula on this earth that accommodates these two together. Now, I believe Abiy is more logical in regard to this than the USA, because Abiy, he has seen that there is no way he could make a compromise. He knows that an autonomous Tigray or can't have a space within an Ethiopia that is primarily, Abiy is concerned in his power. His image of Ethiopia that would be ruled by the PP, by the Prosperity Party, and him for years to come. So he doesn't see any way of accommodating an autonomous Tigray within that Ethiopia. So for him, the choice are two. Either he will have completely destroyed Tigray, and then it would be easier a subjugated Tigray to fit within that image of Ethiopia. But if he fails, or if he feels that he can't do it, that for example, that Tigray would fight back, and therefore it's not worth fighting, then the other option that he has is to let go of Tigray. So for him, there is no way. But the US is making it hard to let go of Tigray by insisting the unity of Ethiopia. Now, I believe that if we go to the case of the resignation of the two envoys in Tigray, they have somehow, I have a feeling that they have realized the flawed logic that the State Department is following in Ethiopia, although not in the concise terms that I have been putting there. For example, in the article that came, in this article, I believe, they have put, somehow they have sensed that the problem is on Abiy's side, that the US is not putting enough pressure on Abiy. But the State Department is tinkering at the opposite end, at the other end of the problem. So they somehow feel that the absurdity of this logic, although not in the terms that I have put, in the clear terms that I have put before. So for them, for the State Department is trying to do is, it wants to eat its cake and have it too. It wants to create, a compromise between the Abiy government and Tigray, even though there is no way it could be done. Literally, in fact, what it is doing is it's forcing Abiy to take the first course, that is to continue the siege of Tigray, to make it surrender, eventually to make it surrender, because that is the only way this war will end if they keep, holding these two together for a long time. So to me, although I'm not exactly sure, I have the feeling that both Feldman and Satterfield, after having gone back and forth to Ethiopia, they have sensed that the problem is within Abiy, that rather than at the other end of Tigray or anything else. But forcing Abiy, changing the Abiy of image, the Ethiopia is doing, the State Department is doing just the opposite. In fact, what it is trying to do is boost the image of Abiy, proclaim that he's not a genocider. If you proclaim that he's not a genocider and he's a man of peace, then it means you can't do business with him. Then it means that a compromise could be reached between Abiy and TDF. But that is a forced image. In reality, there is no such person at all. What we have is a genocider, and there is no way they could, it's like putting what you call lipstick on a pig. Exactly, that is what they are trying to do. And somehow, both the Feldman and Satterfield have sensed this irreconcilable logic working on in Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Joseph. And so one thing that UMD Media learned as well is from sources is that um, the conclusion arrived at by Feltman and maybe perhaps by Satterfield as well is uh, Abiy is hard to work with and not reliable enough. But I think Secretary Blinken seems to insist on working no matter what with Abiy or um, trying to bring him back. So maybe you can go to your final words, but before that, is there any way out? We have learned today 50 trucks arrived in Maqala. And again, this is the first time after the 20 trucks many people were talking about. Actually, speaking about Dr. Tedros, he mentioned out of 2,000 expected, 20 arrived at that time. And that is a mere 1% of what was required. So, how do you see this playing out, both from Washington's perspective and what's happening in Addis? Scale?
All right. I think um, I think my friend Joseph is really trying a rational analysis of how Abiy approaches governing and negotiations with others. I think both the Americans and others in the world have decided that Abiy is nuts. Abiy is irrational. You can't pin him down to anything because one side of his mouth he says one thing, the other side of his mouth he says another, the opposite, a contradiction, and he doesn't know the difference between the two. This guy is absolutely irrational and they cannot deal with it. And I think the European Union and the Americans have decided on this. No rational person would think that this man is a normal human being. What he was suggesting at the beginning of this discussion, what we said about his portrayal of what Ethiopia would become in the next 30 years, is insane. A rational person would not act this way. What he is saying about Ethiopia is not only unachievable, that is palpable for anybody to see. It is conceptually incoherent. It doesn't come from a rational mind. I think the Americans understand this, European Union understands this, and the Tigrayan leaders understand this. The Tigrayan leaders understood even before his ascent to power. They knew that. This man was analyzed by INSA, psychoanalyzed. They have their own program. They have analyzed and decided before he was a candidate to be chairman of the EPRDF that he was, as I said in normal language, you call it nuts, but they called him that unfit for the prime minister's office to be the leader of Ethiopia. That the Tigrayan leaders have said it at the time, and they have said it since. And Abiy has lived his life in office to validate those issues. So everybody knows that. Everybody that Abiy is not the man to be trusted with power and to be trusted with Ethiopia, with 120 million people. That much is clear. Now, what are they doing? In fact, what I see is that both the Americans and Tigray are really playing a very well orchestrated diplomatic exercise. First, both Tigray and the State Department, in the person of um, the special envoy, and probably even in the State Department or the White House, they have agreed that politics and humanitarian aid should be disentangled. The future of Tigray or the future of Ethiopia or political settlement, this is on hold right now. What is more important for both Tigrayan leaders and the United States and leaders around the world is the humanitarian catastrophe that was impending. So when the Tigray government publishes its statement saying that these should be disentangled, it was not just the Tigrayan government or the Tigrayan leaders saying it. Others are also concurring with the idea that it's not always a political calculation. It's not about political matters. It's humanitarian. That's the first point, that there is an agreement, both in Mekelle, in Washington, that these should be disentangled. The second, the US brokered humanitarian truce, which I predicted might lead to a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, and perhaps an agreement to have a buffer zone between Tigray and Eritrea. That might be the trajectory. It already has some effects. What happened has already had some political effects. The truce has created tensions. The truce with Tigray has tensions, strong tension between the Ethiopian government, Eritrea, and the Amhara region on the one hand, and the Ethiopian government of Abiy Ahmed on the other. There is a strong tension between these two. Now, Eritrea is a problem, and Tigray agrees with this. This is the second point of agreement with the US and Tigray, that Eritrea is a problem child in the Horn of Africa. As long as Eritrea Isaias is in power in Eritrea, the Horn of Africa is not going to be at peace whatsoever. He had shown that in 1993 by going to war with Ethiopia, with Sudan, with Yemen, with Djibouti, with everybody. And since he became a prominent player in Horn of Africa politics, the Horn of Africa had gone from a stable place to a conflagration. That is clear, all too palpable for everybody to see. Eritrea is a problem. There is an agreement here between the United States and Tigrayan leaders. The third, I think the Tigray and Ethiopia conflict has probably ebbed, has probably come to an end. I think Abiy has understood that the danger to Tigray is from Eritrea, not anymore from the ENDF. The reason that I say this is that the ENDF, those people who were the sullen victims of the lecture that he was giving, that we just saw, that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was giving to these generals, they full well know what happened in Tigray. Now, after the war, the ENDF is still in poor operational readiness, in very poor operational preparedness. It has very limited training of conscripts who went into the army because of employment, not because they believed in Ethiopian military, and there is no funding for the Ethiopian military to continue the rigorous training that would be needed to become an effective fighting force against the highly mobilized, the highly trained, highly cohesive TDF. It cannot go against the TDF. The only thing that the Ethiopian military has is the UAV, the drone supremacy and the air supremacy, which the Tigray doesn't have. My point is, there is an agreement between Tigray, at least a tacit agreement between Tigray and the United States on these three issues. So the attack from the south is not imminent. Attack is going to come from the north. And if Tigray and Ethiopia get this truth, and this this goes to a joint declaration of ceasefire, and if this go to a permanent ceasefire between Ethiopia and Tigray, and keep in mind that Abiy is under siege, absolutely under siege, economically, diplomatically, politically, he is under siege. He wants to preserve power. When Abiy is under siege, that is when he acts. And right now, hemmed in from all sides, he had found making peace with Tigray is the only way out of the present conundrum. So, in the coming weeks, what we will see is more uh, uh, humanitarian aid flowing into Tigray and making. They're going to make progress on the truce to a permanent ceasefire, and then the conflict, if there is any conflict in the north, it would be to create a buffer zone between Tigray and Eritrea.
Thank you, Gail and Faisal.
Yeah, I would just add to something to what has already been said. I think the war has ebbed. Absolutely, I agree in the north. I don't know about the south, but Abiy, after what he has seen in Tigray, according to some estimates, that 500,000 people have died or impacted by this war. Infrastructure has been destroyed. He destroyed Tigray initially, but then the war also came to the side of Wallo all the way to Shawa and Gondar, and it also equally destroyed that infrastructure. So even the very ones that used to beat the drum for the war are tired themselves. So I think the war in the north is ebbed. From this point on, I think the discussion between diplomats and the stakeholders on the side of Ethiopia, be it TDF or Abiy's side, is how to feed and the hungry and tackle the famine situation. That's the discussion, as Scale touched it. I think it's about the details now we are talking about. And last time we commented about this, at least I argued on my party that this would be a slow process, because at this point in time, the only card that Abiy has with the West is to play with how much and how many trucks and how much medicine and how much food he can release. The rest of the cards he lost. I don't think the world would sit tight if he starts another war and uses drones and bombs civilian centers. I think probably they talked about that, what had happened in the past, and what's tolerable and what cannot be tolerated from now on. As to the issue of genocide, I think we are saying it's genocide, but some experts, as the Amnesty's report and the Human Rights Watch group alluded to, the terminologies have different meaning to the experts. So I will not pick a fight on that. I think what has already been said is enough to put any time the chance comes around to put Abiy on a court and ask him to answer some of the atrocities and war crimes and crimes against humanity. Those are equally heavy terminologies and heavy crimes. So that is there. I think in terms of making sense of the US at this point in time, I think we need to understand the three things, in my opinion, at least. Number one, at any given situation, when it comes to politics, the US will side with a country that claims to have sovereignty within the international world till last minute. So when Abiy and TDF are competing for the attention of the US and Biden and his team, definitely they will weigh on the side of Ethiopia, even if it is wrong. That's number one. Number two, I think Ethiopia has a huge elasticity to tolerating, and that's Yosef's issue, to tolerating, in my opinion, autocrats, dictators, and criminal rulers throughout the world. This is a country, when you look at the US diplomatic history, that has tolerated Mobutu Sese for many, many, many years, or the Marcos of Philippines. Not only were they friends, but they funded him and armed him. So the capacity that the US has to carry on its shoulders dictators and autocrats, and even look the other way sometimes when people are being massacred. We know. I mean, the Biafra War is a situation where the US was always with a Nigerian standing government, historically, when the Igbo people were literally being burned on a daily basis. So that is an American norm. So I wouldn't really just expect much more than the slow but steady diplomatic issues that we have been talking about on the issue of aid and food aid. I think the dynamics has changed, and the US is aware of that. So is Abiy, but he's posturing, but he's aware of that. And the discussion is no longer, can Abiy eliminate TDF? Can he resume another war in Tigray? I think if he pushes the envelope, the West could even look for another alternative, which is to even entertain one way or another arming TDF if it comes to that self-defense. I think in the past they erred on the side of maintaining and supporting Ethiopia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. But if Abiy fails to listen to the words of diplomacy, I think things could change. One last issue. The US has endorsed, I think, beginning from the 1970s after they faced the fiasco of Allende's revolution and overthrowing foreign governments, they switched direction, and the emphasis has been more or less to seek or help countries make change through democratic forces and democratic change. That drives me to the issue of people, groups like Oromo Federalist groups, to really, as I think it was the scale or Joseph saying, to show to the rest of the world that there is an embryonic alternative leadership. If TDF is considered to be a warring faction, in which case the US may not see that as a democratic alternative to the existing system, which I think Abiy is, and I don't think the State Department or the West at this point in time sees Abiy as a democratic leader. What they see is as a silly autocratic guy who's occupying a seat of an important country from the US point of view when it comes to regional security, population-wise, what have you. So I think upon on the side of Ethiopians, especially political activists such as Marara Gudina, this is the time to cultivate an alternative leadership to Abiy by creating cross-sectional alliances with different groups in the country who are frustrated with the rule of Abiy. I think the warring situation will continue. Allah will seek issues to be resolved through whatever means that they are doing now, because they have been cornered and they will not be included in the process. TDF will sit on the sides to make sure that no other army from Ethiopia's side attacks its people. To whatever extent it can protect its people, it will do that. There is the chance for FECO and other groups to show alternative leadership inside the country so that they can work with Western powers. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. And Yosef, your reflection and your final word of the day.
All right, okay. First, the idea that Abiy is irrational. I mean, so many leaders in our world now are irrational. You could talk about Erdogan, you could talk about Bolsonaro of Brazil, you could talk about Modi, or many of them. But that is not the issue. The issue is whether these irrational people are being rational when it comes to preserving their power. They know exactly what they want to do when it comes to preserving their power. And the Abiy knows that. That's my point. Second one is whether the US wants to preserve that person as a leader of the country at this point in time. The idea of saving Abiy, the idea of seeing no other alternative to Abiy at this point, and that is what matters. These are the 2 points that matter at this particular time. Okay? The second one is the fact that the US and the TDF are trying to disentangle the politics out of the humanitarian crisis. True. That they keep saying, for example, the TPLF keeps saying that, but it has been doing just the opposite. By tying this humanitarian truce with access for the aid. That's exactly what it has done. And now it is in a process where it has been, for example, the next step. We don't know exactly what the next demand of Abiy will be. I hope what Professor Hiskiel has been saying is true, that from now on we'll see progress in aid delivery to Tigray. So far, I haven't seen that, and hopefully we will see that. But to me, it's not clear, because Abiy, the blocking of aid of Abiy so far has not been on the because of the Amharas, the Eritreans, or the Afars. It has been primarily him. The problem has been primarily him. As I have mentioned numerous times before, he could have easily done his part, even if we believe that the Afars and the Amharas are the ones who are blocking the aid. He could have easily released the banking system in, for example, in Tigray. He could have easily switched on the electricity in Tigray. There are so many things that he could do without the help of anyone else. We haven't seen that yet, but I hope his scale is true. The other one is the attack of the North. What I am seeing in Eritrea is now Eritrean soldiers are fanning out from Eritrea. Some of them have about 5 or 10,000 of them have already come through the Afar to the Kobo area. Others are concentrating in Sokota. The other part, the huge concentration of them is, of course, in Western Tigray. And now we are hearing that they are spreading all along the Sudanese border, from starting from what you call the Humara, all the way to Matamma. That's where the war has been taking on now. So it seems either through the agreement with the Amharas only or with the Ethiopian government, I don't know, that even if a buffer zone is being created, the buffer zone is created between Eritrea and Tigray, it will be to the benefit of Eritrea. It will not stop Eritrea from intervening in the other parts of Ethiopia, so far as they have an access through Western Tigray or through Afar itself. But anyway, let me go to my final remarks. And my final remarks have to do with the issues that you have raised in regard to Tedros, Dr. Tedros Adhanom. Okay, here is the thing. I see at least 3 levels of deception in that case when it comes to the West treatment of Tigray as opposed to Ukraine. Okay, let me first say this. I haven't heard of Russians raping tens of thousands of Ukrainian women. I haven't heard also of hundreds of massacres the way it has been done in Tigray, although there has been brutal killings in Ukraine too. I haven't heard, so for example, these are the marks of genocide. I haven't seen the Russians, for example, raiding historical and religious areas, deliberately destroying Ukrainian heritage, which, by the way, they share the same way the Eritreans and the Ethiopians share with the Tigrayan heritage. Moreover, even in the case of refugees, there's more than 3 million refugees that have gone, of Ukrainian refugees reaching the other parts of Europe. Even that could be looked at differently, because there has been no one who has been preventing them from reaching Poland or other parts of Europe. While in Tigray, it's just the opposite. If they had a chance, the Tigrayans would also have reached Sudan in their millions. But they have been blocked in Western Tigray. So what we are looking at is a different way. And this has been, by the way, the West has been complicit in this. The EU is comfortable with this arrangement precisely because it doesn't want to see millions of Habesha or Tigrayan refugees going to Europe. So it's that's why it doesn't say a lot about the Western Tigray. We don't hear anymore the Europeans insisting on the other forces leaving from Western Europe. From Western Tigray. The humanitarian corridors in Ukraine also. The Russians are not. I mean, there are cases here and there, but the Russians overall have been allowing humanitarian corridors. We don't see that in Tigray. Yet, what we have seen is that in the case of Biden, within 2 months, he has declared it genocide. Even though I doubt that, even though it's a war crime, I doubt that it would qualify as genocide at this particular time. Yet, the very the genocide in Tigray that has been going on for 1 and 7 months, the United States has been actively minimizing that it is genocide. In fact, what they have been doing is that they have been putting human face to the genocider. That is what we have been looking at. Another one is financing and the sanctions. The sanctions on the Soviet, on Russia has been, I mean, I don't think anybody has seen that kind of sanctioning before. While in Ethiopia, we see some kind of sanctions, but not as big one as that one. Even the if you had looked at the language, for example, used in by the World Bank in providing this 300 million loan, the language that they have used is the level of duplicity is astounding. One of the reasons that they bring, one of the main reasons, in fact, that they bring is that to help the reconstruction of Tigray itself. The same way they have been doing all the aid up to now. Up to now, they have provided, the West has provided more than 1 billion of aid to Tigray, almost none of which, only 5% of which have reached Tigray. And the rest has been handed to Ethiopia for whatever it is, or whatever, to do whatever it wants to do with that. And now exactly the 300 million are being handed over to Ethiopia, while supposedly some of that would reach to Tigray. The money is given to the genocider to provide money to its victims. If you remember, lately there has been numbers coming out. There are about 80,000 pensioners in Tigray right now, and there are about 200,000 salaried workers in Tigray. All of these are not getting any paychecks from Ethiopia. If you add their families, their family members, this would amount to roughly around 1.5 million of them. These are the people that are starving in Tigray now. It's not the peasants that are starving. It is the middle class people that has been in urban areas that are starving right now. So if you look at all this, then what we are looking at is that if the West really meant to help Tigray, they had also a means of bypassing Ethiopia by providing money, for example, to these people through the workers, the humanitarian workers. They haven't been doing that. So to me, the Dr. Tedros has mentioned the indifference or the different ways that the world is treating these two cases, the colored people versus the whites in Ukraine. But if you look at it in Tigray, it has these many levels that we could look at it. In fact, more than what Dr. Tedros has said. Thank you.
Thank you, Yosef, and thank you, everyone. And that would be the end of our show. Before that, I just want to cite a Ukrainian, actually, who happened to agree with Dr. Theodros Adhanom. This is She's a Ukrainian activist, writer, and content producer, and global head of digital Amnesty. And this is what she says: if you care about what's going on in my country, Ukraine, you should also care about what's going on in Western Tigray. Horrifying but important report from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, with amazing work by Vanessa Tsahaye, stand against atrocities everywhere. I think that clearly covers what you panelists were saying. And with that, we end our show today. And thank you very much for your time and for your insight. Good night from here.
Good night.
You have been following UMD Media's weekly show, the H Panel. In the H Panel, discussed making sense of US's take on Abiy Ahmed, and your show host was Gita Josepha. Bye from here. Good night.